I know my name is like really long, so if you just Kandy Lopez is fine. Um, I know, and there was gonna be an addition to that too, but it's fine. As he mentioned, I am an assistant professor at Nova Southeastern University. I actually teach with Tennille Schuster, who's back there, who's an associate professor as well. So if you want to get any information regarding the graphic design track, she is the one that you should speak to. I'm more of the studio based, so it's more hands-on painting, drawing, um, three-dimensional things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my background because I think it's important, especially if we're talking about careers within the art world. Did I know I wanted to be an artist? No, I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I just knew that I liked school and I liked writing a lot on sheets of paper. I was born in Bayonne, New Jersey, so that's a little picture of me and my older brother riding bikes. Bayonne was more of a urban kind of city, and it was a mix of Hispanics, African Americans, and also whites. And growing up in Bayonne, New Jersey, I grew up with a huge family. So my family's from Dominican Republic, and my mom is 1 out of 6, and my father's 1 out of 14. So there's a lot of kids. So I'm in the back, right? Because my cousin is taking over. So I'm right back here. And we're actually 3 days apart. So there's 6 of us that's around the same age. So when it was time to do, your typical 15s, that was a show. So growing up around all these people really reinforce or mold your personality. Everyone's trying to do something different and become an individual. And when you have 20, 30 cousins trying to, become a doctor or, become one of those careers where they can actually make a lot of money at that point in time, you kind of want to go in a separate route at that point. So this is actually one of the first pieces of my art that was documented. I like to showcase this because it's important to show that no, I wasn't born a Leonardo da Vinci at all, right? I actually was taught how to draw and paint and create things. So this was actually taken, I think I was 5 at this point. And it's a collaboration drawing of mine and my father's. So the ones that actually look like a better person is my father's. So obviously, in comparison to mine, right? But at least I have the 5 fingers that are showcasing there. And he also loves sports. So one of those sports being volleyball or play ball is what he called it. So the drawing at the top is his and the drawing at the bottom is mine. But another reason why I like to showcase this image is also because there's an environment and there's a person. Because that actually gets reinforced within my artwork in the future, which I didn't really connect until I got into grad school. Because the environment really influenced me as an individual and as an artist. So I went to your typical elementary school. I was in New Jersey and I moved down when I was 8, turning 9. And I grew up in Hialeah, Florida. You guys know where Hialeah, Florida is? Yes. That's right. Where there's a lot of traffic and people can't drive at that point in time. So I had a best friend who was also Hispanic. She was Puerto Rican and Dominican. And she loved to dance. It's a Hispanic thing. We love to, bachata, merengue, anything that you can throw at us, we're good. So she wanted to go into a magnet program. Are you guys familiar with a magnet program? For those that are not, you have your regular school hours, you do your math, your science, and then after school, instead of staying in the playground, you will actually do an art form. So that was either dance or theater or visual arts or music. So I chose dance. So I went into a dance magnet program during elementary school. I loved it. I really liked to dance until they introduced ballet. Okay, I am not flexible. I'm still not flexible. So I'm like, this is not going to work for me. But I wanted to be with my best friend. And she was transferring into a middle school, which is Northern Middle School, which is in Opelika. Do you guys know where Opelika is? Yes. Okay, so back then, when I was going to middle school, the school was a C/B school. By the time I got out of that school and went into high school, it turned into an F school. So it was a hot mess by the point in time that we transitioned through that space. There was a lot more violence happening. There was always police cars in the front lot. There was a lot of students that would end up fighting where like the whole school ends up transitioning to the space of where it is that they were, going at it. So that really influenced me as a person. There was a separation between the Hispanics, so the Hispanics would be in the front, and then the African Americans would be in the back, where I had to like choose a space where I was going to be, but I didn't really feel like I was part of the Hispanic crew because I was a little bit darker, and I loved my afro at that point, so I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be with the African Americans in the back. But then we also had a friend who was white, so it was kind of like this blend. So I was the middle one that could relate to both sides, and I had my white friend and my black friend. So it wasn't, there was this tug when it came to identity that happens during middle school. And I don't think it's just me, I think it's a lot of people trying to figure out who they are, and what kind of grouping they want to fit in if they want to fit into a group. So that was something that really influenced my art later on, me not knowing that that's what it did. So I didn't go into dance, I went into art because I couldn't play an instrument. I wasn't that interested in music. And I couldn't act for anything. And dance was out of the question because ballet was there. So the only thing that really came up was art, since I like to draw Pokemon and all the little characters that came out during that time. I'm an 80s baby. So I grew up with the hip hop and all the cartoons coming out on Cartoon Network. That was the thing for me. While I was at Norland, my two teachers were really strict. I had a male teacher and a female teacher. And after school, it was really quiet. You would come in, you would do your work, you would get feedback, you would redo your work, get feedback. You were working on a piece for months. Because they really wanted to show you the technique and so that you can actually create something that you were proud of. So these were one of the two examples that came out of middle school. The bone one actually taking a longer time, and that's pen and watercolor. And then all of a sudden, I was really interested in the body, but not like clothed people. I was interested in the nudes. And I found a magazine that had a nude woman, sort of, because her hair is covering her. And I wanted to see how I can create that within a painting, because I was more of a drawer by that point. I felt more comfortable drawing. I knew how to figure out proportions because you were taught that. And I fell in love with the figure and painting the figure. So within that middle school, we did a lot of things. Like we did photography, we did ceramics, we did drawing, we did painting. We did figurative stuff. We also did landscapes. Anything that you can think of, our teachers threw at us. It was a way to, I guess, keep our mind busy too from all the craziness that was happening at Norland. And they also told us that we had to audition to 4 other magnet high schools. So it was Northwestern was one of them. Dash was another, which is actually in Midtown. There was New World, and then there was Michael Kropp. Michael Kropp at that time was like the new shiny school. Okay, so this was in 2002, I think, if I'm correct with my dates. Yes, 2002. Everybody wanted to go to Michael Kropp, which is in Aventura. But I wanted to go to the best high school possible, which for my instructors, it was New World. So we had to put a portfolio together. We had to audition. It was this whole big thing. A lot of parents would actually commute the students that couldn't go. So that was a nice way of getting to know your classmates' parents. So you're building this community within the students that you're participating in this event with. So I ended up applying to all 4, and I got into all 4, luckily. But my last letter was from New World. Everyone else knew that they got in, and I'm like, but my teachers ended up telling me my letter got lost somehow, somewhere. So these are some of the works that I made while I was at New World. So again, lots of still lifes, trying to perfect your techniques, lots of landscapes. Photography was in play. As you can tell, I'm really bad with 3-dimensional stuff. I'm more of a 2D person. So that was one of my horrible creations, but I like to put it in there because, I don't know, showcase that there's another side, even though it's bad. Um, but I still had that passion for drawing too. So I put this slide in there because I want you guys to understand the commute that it takes to get to this school. So if you do not know where New World is, it's in downtown Miami. I was living in Miami Gardens at this time. So my mom wasn't going to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to take me to school because school started at 7:25 and you had to be there because you can only get 10 tardies. And if you get 10 tardies, something bad was going to happen to you. Okay? So I had to wake up at 5, get to my bus stop by 5:30. The bus stop picks up everybody from that region. You end up going to the train station. You get on the train. It takes you all the way to the government center, which is in downtown. And you have to walk to school, and you have to get there by 7:25. The worst is when people would mess up with the train, like somebody would end up jumping in front of the train, so then we had to wait and everyone was late. So you kind of had an excuse because you weren't the only one that was late, but this was every day. So school would go all the way to 3:25-ish, and then repeat the whole process all over again. By the time you get home, it's 5:30. So it's 12 hours. So basically, I'm spending most of my day in school, and then when I get home, it's all artwork that you're making because you have homework, and there's math, and there's science, and there's Spanish homework, and there's geometry. There's so much stuff that you have to do on top of creating a new piece every week. And this was one of the pieces that I made. So I'd like to take pictures, especially black and white photographs. We had the dark room in middle school, and we also had a dark room at New World. I was interested in portraitures as well. So this is actually my best friend on the train as we're heading to school. We try to keep to ourselves. Again, these are, 16, 17-year-olds hanging with each other for protection because you hear stories all the time. And this is when cell phones was like the Nokia, when they finally came out and you finally got that Nokia cell phone. You were playing Snake. That's what we were doing in the morning before we got to school. And then after I finally graduated, and they talked a little bit about art history when we were in high school, but it was like a one class thing. And the teacher wasn't really that serious. It was more of a fun class. So by the time I decided to continue my love for art, I took an art history course, and that actually changed my feel for the art world. So this is William Bergeron, and I like to put myself within the work. I like the contemporary version of putting a figure that's in present day. Back then, it was me, and this is usually how I dressed. So I would have like really baggy clothes and some sneakers and a really heavy sweater because I didn't really want attention on me. So inserting myself in these spaces. I went to the University of South Florida. So you can see that the artwork that I was looking at was Caravaggio, and this is the conversion on the way to Damascus. And we had an assignment where we had to cut magazines, and we had to paint that image of what we cut. So we had to create a collage, which my students know because I have 3 in the back.
It was so much fun.
So it's an interesting way of creating the same composition and thinking about the story that you're choosing, and then making it more contemporary within that piece. So you're actually creating a different story within your work that still talks about art history. Or things like this. So again, looking at William Bergeron and making it more contemporary. So I was really obsessed with these shoes called Dunks. And then the Dunks have like different names. So there's like Sesame Street Dunks, like Bernie Dunks, Freddy Krueger Dunks. So it's just a type of shoes. They're called SBs as well. I was obsessed during this series. It was something bad, and they're really expensive during my undergraduate. So putting in these cultures, these attributes that references these cultures, especially where I was growing up in middle school. Again, putting that Tupac Thug Life tattoo in the middle of the abdomen, putting piercings. This is when the afros started to come in. And also you can see that there's the SB dunks on the bottom. Again, another example. My teachers didn't know what in the world I was doing or why, and they would ask me, and I didn't know. It was just something I was interested in. So it was a lot of butting heads at that point because they were trying to get it out of me, but I couldn't figure it out yet. It was just like, no, I like it. It looks cool. It's what I like to do, right? Um, and eventually we had to come up with a thesis for our BFA. I mean our BFA, your Bachelor's of Fine Arts. So looking through all of the history and me knowing about our history at that point and also figurative work, I wanted to capture people within my community because I thought that it was important to represent others within a museum. So I was thinking about these things and visiting these places while I was creating my thesis. And it was important to look at the history and the research for me to finally get to this point. So I came up with this thesis called swag. So swag basically meaning somebody who's confident, someone who has a fashion sense, someone that I would like to be. Hopefully I have swag at some point in time. Someone who's cool, basically, is what it is. So I was finding people within my neighborhood and within the community and people that I knew that had swag and trying to take a picture of them. The problem with that is once you put a camera in front of someone, they totally like freeze or they don't know what should I do? I'm just like, be yourself. It's going to be fine. So it was a lot of give and take and a lot of pictures to try to get the right image. So when I went into grad school, I went to Florida Atlantic University. And I started off with this idea of swag. And that totally like scared my committee members because they didn't understand what it was. So I was in a school where there was just one minority that was a professor, and she was an Afro-Caribbean person, so she was Afro-Cuban. So she kind of understood what I was saying, but everyone else did not understand. So it's kind of like a breaking down of what I thought swag was. So I'm like, okay, it is fashion, so I'm just going to put a pile of clothes, and maybe that pile of clothes of painting has swag. It's also about body language, so maybe I'm just going to draw someone with a really expressionistic face that also has this really tough body language. Maybe it has to deal with just facial expression so that one lip that's up, right, to showcase, you know, I'm a thug or whatever it is. So there was a lot of give and take. And then I was like, well, maybe it's the environment that these people come from that actually defines swag. So it was trying to figure out what the definition was for me. And eventually I started getting into social media. So I finally got an Instagram. I'm one of those people that wait to see if the thing actually like works at a point in time. I didn't get Facebook till like 5 years later. I was that person. I'm just like, I don't know about Facebook. The government's trying to find me. So I finally got Instagram, and I fell in love with people's style, because you could just search whatever it is that you want. And I started following people, and then I would ask them, hey, can I borrow this image that you have because I think you have swag, I want to draw it. Sure. And then I would tag them, and then they would put it on their Instagram, and then they would tag other people. So it was a way of marketing myself. So when I went to USF, I also got a marketing and management degree. So it was it's called the Bachelor of Science degree. I was scared. I'm not going to lie. I was one of those students that I didn't really just want to follow the art path because I didn't know if it was going to make money for me. And because my mom and everyone else in the background is telling you that you're going to be a starving artist. But I knew that that's what I loved. And no matter what it was that I was doing, I had to create art. I didn't create art for a whole year, and it was the most depressive year I've ever had. So it's important for me to actually make, so I could be, a happy-go-lucky person, especially for my students. So because of that marketing and management degree, I understood how it is to tackle into other people, especially when social media was becoming like this huge thing back then. And these are 15 of them, but I have 200 of them. These are 15-minute, 5 by 7 inch watercolors. So I start off with pen drawings, and then I just splash on some watercolor on there. And it's more of a looser format. I get really bored with knowing what I'm making. So if I know how to make a really realistic person, then so what? I have to move on to something else, something that's a little bit more challenging, like painting on walls. This was my first mural in my studio, which I got permission from my committee, so they wouldn't, kick me out of the place. So this was during my MFA. And then I had one professor say, well, you always have these people, but you never incorporate the environment. Like, isn't the environment important to you? So I said, okay, well, I'm going to showcase just the environment with no people to see how I feel about it. So these are 5 by 10 foot paintings, so they're pretty large. And they're also drawings because this is also Kandy within it, which drips off of this paper that's a little bit more plasticky. It's called Yupo paper. And it was important to me to showcase the real Miami, not the Miami of South Beach and the Miami that people think that everybody lives in, because most of us don't live in these places. If you actually live in South Florida, if you live in not the lower sections, but not in Brickell, is what I'm trying to say. Not in South Beach, right? So we're living like in Miami Gardens. We're living in Carol City, Opa-locka, Pembroke Pines, right? I should mention that too. So taking pictures of these different places and actually assembling them so they kind of make sense. So this is more of the Wynwood before it actually became Wynwood. And this actually being a composite of Opa-locka and also Little Haiti and Little Havana within one. So thinking about neighborhoods that aren't really showcased. These are all 5 by 10 feet. And this is what they actually look like on a wall. So I dedicated one to Guanabacoa, which is in Little Havana as well. So showcasing their houses there as too. And then I realized I miss my figures, but I want my environments to also talk to my figures. So if I'm going to have these 5 by 10 foot spaces where my figures are supposed to be in, even though I don't want them to be in the space, I needed to separate them. So I started creating these figures on these plexiglass sheets. So these are 8 by 4 inch plexiglass. I think they're a quarter thick, so they're pretty heavy. And that's me in my studio. I had to repaint that mural off that wall so that I can actually see these people that I was creating. And this is oil on the plexiglass. So now there was a way to connect the people within the environment. So as a viewer, you can actually go behind the people, so you are also part of the environment. And the background, I started experimenting with different materials, and I really like that mirrored film because you as a viewer, you can see yourself within the space, and you can also move around the people and actually become part of the space. Especially showcasing this kind of work within a South Florida environment was important for me, so that people can actually see themselves within the work. And it wasn't something that was unusual, something that you do not really see in galleries and museums. And this is how I worked. So this is a really large mirrored film. Mirrored film basically is like tints for your car, but they actually sell it in like really big rolls. So it was fun trying to find large sheets of plexiglass and large sheets of mirrored film and calling these different warehouses and explaining what you were doing. They're like, what are you using my mirrored film for? Like, I'm painting on it. So I was constantly up and down on ladders trying to finish this piece. And this is just an example of people actually going around it so that you can see that there was actual space. This was part of the MFA show that I had in 2014. I also experimented with printmaking because, like I said, I get really bored with the same kind of material over and over again. And this is another example of getting bored with materials over and over again. So I thought about yarn, since I'm talking about fashion and what our clothes are made out of, right? So I'm thinking about cotton at this point. I'm like, how cool would it be if I could make a person out of yarn, just with black and white and more of a monochromatic feel instead of putting in color, because most of my work at this point was monochromatic. It's easier to read. You think about At least for me, that really deep blue was more nostalgic. Instead of having like these really colorful figures, it's a way to connect to the individuals instead of thinking about what it is that they're wearing. So this is plastic canvas, and there's acrylic on the background, so I painted, and then I created the person on top of that. This is 7 feet by 4.5. And I also wanted to put, like, currently, I have a show at St. Thomas University that actually showcases some of the work that was in this slide. So if you guys have time, it's in Miami Gardens as well. It's by the library. But I know that this had to deal more with careers. I just wanted to give you guys a background about who I am and what kind of art I make, because I think it's important to showcase that. Again, I never thought I was going to be an artist. It just so happened that I went into that route. After I received my MFA, I applied to 135 jobs. Why do I know that number? Because I counted all my emails. I started applying in November before I graduated because I knew in my brain that I was going to get a job, no matter what anyone said. I was like, there's going to be positive energy out there. I can feel it. I'm going to get a job. And I ended up getting a job at Daytona State College, which is in Daytona, so by Daytona Beach, so it was nice because I was still in Florida, so I still had that connection with my family. But at that point in time, I also had a partner at that point, so we did the long distance thing for 2 years until finally there was an opening at Nova that I applied for, and I miraculously got that job. I was blessed with that job. So that's where I am now. So that's how I am, and I got the position that I have. But aside from that, it's always making work. So it's important to keep fulfilling your passion and doing what it is that makes you happy. I also wanted to showcase some student examples. So I'm thinking about the future for them and trying to get them to be better technically, because that's the way that I was taught. So I have a lot of students that end up coming into my class saying, oh, I can't paint. I can't draw. So then I'm like, well, why did you take the class? Oh, because I want to learn how to paint and how to draw. And I'm like, okay, so you have a passion for this. So don't tell me that you can't do it if you haven't tried it. So it's showing them that it's possible to actually learn how to become an artist, or learn how to show something that's three-dimensional into two-dimensional format. So these are some still lifes, just like I started. Again, these are just student examples. I try to keep my still lifes extremely exciting and challenging. So there's always glass. There's always some kind of reflection that's happening. There's always things that have some intricate details, specifically with some statues, because I want them to learn how to paint everything, especially fabric, which they hate. But it's good for them, because someone's going to ask them to paint them, and they're going to have to paint somebody's clothes, and they're going to have to need to know how to do that. More fabric. Different techniques. This is more about drawing. So I also teach drawing at Nova, which is one of my favorite classes to teach, because it deals with proportion and lighting and contrast, which you need to know how to draw to be able to paint, especially if it's traditional types of painting, not abstract really. That's when we get into painting too, which is a little bit more freeing. There's also figure drawing that we teach there as well. So these are some of the figure drawing examples from my students. So the one that's to your right is actually a life-size drawing. So that's one of their end of the year finals, where they have to draw themselves life-size, no pictures. Everything is in front of you. So they have a mirror, and they have to bring that mirror to class. They have to stand in the same position with the same clothes. So every time they end up coming in, you know, they have to change and put that thing back on. So they really love that project. This was part of one of the examples for my two-dimensional or 2D class, where they learn about composition and color and balance and perspective and rhythm and all the elements and principles of design. And this is actually an example from a student at Daytona State College. There's two separate ones. I really love collaging, as you can tell. So I give them, I gave them a collage piece that had to deal with color, like the one to your right, where that's all made out of color from magazines. It's not an image. She actually cut out different tones and created her face and created her hair and created that kind of environment. And then I was open for them to actually use a computer so that they can make and create things that had to deal with the elements and principles of design too, so repetition or focal point or pattern and rhythm. So now we get into jobs. And I always get questions about, well, what am I going to do with an arts degree? What can I do with an arts degree? My mom doesn't want to pay for college for me to go and get an arts degree. They want me to become an architect, or they want me to become a doctor, a biologist. At Nova, it's really science-based. It's really science-centered. So we have a lot of either double majors within the art career, or we have a lot of minors, because a lot of students are scared to get that degree, and also they're scared to fight with their parents about what it is that they want to do as well, and also be financially independent because they're relying on their parents to pay for their tuition since it's a private university. All I can tell them is just to follow your heart, because things will end up falling into place. But I still wanted to talk about these different jobs. So there's this great documentary on Netflix. It's called Abstract. If you haven't seen it and you have a Netflix, you should see it. Abstract, the art of design. So I think there's 6 or 8, there might be 6 different artists that do different things within the art world. So there's a graphic designer. There's also a designer for cars, so an automobile designer. There is, well, I guess I could talk about it. I'm going to talk about different jobs. So one of the jobs is a forensic artist. So forensic artists actually work closely with law enforcement to get the criminals or the suspects, to draw them up, or to do facial reconstructions too, and also with composites and sketches. They also work in the courthouse. So when you see those pictures on the TV, which I thought I was going to be too, because I was all over the place with this art thing, I was like, that would be cool to be a forensic artist, but my career didn't go that path. And then I wanted to put a little basis on salary, so they start off with 31 and it can go all the way to 65K, depending on their skill and depending on who they know. So the thing with art too is all about networking. So to be able to network too, you need to be responsible and organized. So that's where the business degree comes in, right? So you have to turn in things on time. You have to follow the direction so that you can actually get that job. This is another designer. This is S. Devlin, and she's actually part of that Netflix series. And this has to deal with stage designing, and stage designers actually make a good ton of money. It depends also on who you know, and it depends on your work. So she's a very well-known stage designer. She has created stages for all kinds of artists. Think about when there's performances, there's somebody that has to design that stuff. When you're thinking about theater and creating a space, there's someone that has to design that stuff too. So there's artists even within that realm as well. When they're thinking about lighting and they're thinking about the contrast, and they're thinking about how the light is actually going to, change the space, or how to change the space at that point in time. There's also character designers. So we have a lot of students that are interested in this within Nova. So they're interested in illustration, they're interested in the development of character, and why in Florida. What's in Florida? Disney World. They're also interested in Pixar too, so that whole idea of creating these caricatures not only in the computer, but also sculptural, and how they could make money with that. If you ever watch a movie and you sit through the entire movie, you see how many artists they need within that one realm, right? There's tons and tons and tons and tons of artists, which is what I tell my students too, is there's jobs out there, you just gotta find them and look for them. So the salary base is there too, 49 and 99K. There's also fashion designers and costume designers as well. So this showcasing that within the movies is where you're going to need a designer to design these different kinds of clothes. I put the Batman designer there, and also the Game of Thrones designer, which is a female, which I'm super like proud of, to actually set designs for these different people. Car designer, so we have automobile. So this is another person that's actually part of that Netflix series too, and it's an hour for each person. So you get to know them as a person, and you also get to know how they ended up in the space that they did, and how they have transformed the art world and what kind of money they make, because they point that out too. These are examples of my students' works actually. So there's 2 students back there, and they know about this project. So creating fake art, or should I say fake food. So these things are actually fake. So there's people that contract artists to create these fake sets, if it's for theater or if it's for a commercial or if it's for photographs. So there's artists that actually are needed out there to create these fake things. So like the Subway and the sushi, which they had fun with too, trying to find out which materials to work with. And then there's also food artists that deal with food in general, so like real food. So spraying the food so that it looks nice. You guys know all the advertisements of McDonald's and how pretty the hamburgers are until you actually get the hamburger. And it looks nothing like the photograph, right? Because there was a set designer, a food designer, to make it look that good. There's also photography. There's art history. There is making these scary objects for movies as well. There's illustration, which is a path that I also thought I was going to go into, but I'm really not good at making stuff up on the spot without looking at something. And then there's also working with cameras and behind the scenes, right, and editing. That's part of art as well. There are tattoo artists. There's architecture. It's like a list and a list and a list. Graphic design, where you can design pretty much anything. So there's web, internet, there's products that have to deal with marketing, there's books, prints, there's sets, there's ads, there's commercials, etc., etc. There's so many things that you can do with a graphic design career. And then there's a whole list of other things that you can do. I don't have like 2 hours to go through all of these things, but just to give you guys an idea, it's not just becoming a painter and living off of whatever kind of tips you get from New York. That's not how it is. You can find a job in the arts world. You're probably going to have to search for a few, but it'll be there. These are some of the jobs that I've actually had. So I was a artist assistant, and that's me putting up the person's work and also working with them with their art. So them telling me what it is that they need me to do. They need me to paint white here. They need me to draw a circle there. You can actually get paid to become an art assistant as well, especially if you're working for an artist that's making money, because they're going to need help to create their works, because there's no way that they're going to create it with the high demand that they're getting. I've also worked in different museums and galleries. So this is the Bernice Steinbaum Museum when it was, or Steinbaum Gallery when it was a gallery. She actually sold it and it turned into another, like a really big gallery. But she is well known within the art world, and it was fun working with her within her space. I've also worked for summer camps, which is one of the things that I really love to do, is working within the community, because I get the little people excited to create some artwork. So this is the Norton Museum of Art, and I was a summer camp manager. So we created a different kind of curriculum with these kids, and the kids will end up coming within the bus. So there was like 50, 60 kids within a room, and there were chaperones, and they all had to create this one thing. And you had to talk to them about the thing, and they had to learn how to create. This one being, I think we had like a Barbie exhibition, and they ended up making little Barbies, or these little plastic dolls, the men and the women. So I should say like the little boys and the little girls had to create these little dolls. So that was fun for them, thinking on a different format. I've also taught for Sketchbook Thursday, which is also part of the Norton Museum. So again, it's who you know. So sketching out some things, hiring some models, being part of that particular event. This is another example of working with students, but this case being middle school students where you're actually hired as a contractor. So there's a community that ends up contacting you, or a program that ends up contacting you because they're interested in your artwork and what you can give to the community, especially being a minority. This is in Lake Worth, and it was part of the farmers' children that are actually out there, and having an activity that they do after school so they're not home getting in trouble. So this was a way of bringing in the artwork to them. And then another thing that I've also tried is creating lecture series. That's also fun, right? Because it's mixing the art part of me and also the business part of me. So getting together these different artists and putting this program together depending on what's in the exhibition space. That's also fun. That's also something you can do. Or teaching within museums and galleries as well. So they have these separate workshops that you can go in and you can do. This one actually being a drawing workshop, which was, I think it was a 6-day one. So it was, I think, once every week. So you get paid to do that as well. And then the last slide being a curator. And this is one of the ones that I actually like. Well, not that I didn't like the other ones, but I really like curating and getting a whole mess of artwork from different artists and figuring out the space and figuring out how you're going to mount it on the walls or on the ceiling or on the floor. So that's something that I also enjoy, and that's also a job as well. And that's it.
Anyone have any questions at all for Kandy? Sure, someone does.
What will be the difference between your teachers and you teaching now?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like I'm more of a flexible teacher. And my students are probably like, what in the world? But my teachers were, especially in middle school, was more like, you guys are young, you need to be quiet, and you need to do your work. Like, no music, no nothing, stay in your lane. When it was high school at New World, you couldn't get a C. If you got a C, you were kicked out. A C in anything, a C in math, a C in Spanish, it was like you were out of there. And then you had to keep up with the load. Like, we had to do 3 by 4 foot paintings every week. So it was a lot. And when it was time for critique, it wasn't the kinds of critiques that I give. It was more like, what in the hell is that? And why did you create that, right? So it was more trying to get it out of your brain than what I think I do. I think I'm really nice with being a teacher.
How do you balance your teaching and your job and then like your art and your art practice?
So that's a good question. In the beginning, when I was teaching, it was manageable because it's a different load for teaching. So load being like I'm teaching 4 classes per semester at Nova. So it's a 4-4, which means that I'm at school not most of the time like a regular person that has a 9 to 5. My hours are less. So when I get home and if I have the energy, which is usually during the weekend because we're off Saturday and Sunday, is when you can actually create artwork. Or even like as my students are working, sometimes I have a little sketchbook, or when I'm doing demos, that's me creating still. So it's still putting my hands-on experience into showcasing what they can also do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you integrate it.
Yeah.
And summer.
And summer, yes. So school's over, so I have time to make some art. So that's exciting too.
What are you working on right now?
Right now,
Her masterpiece.
I'm working on my masterpiece. I'm actually making PowerPoints for my fall semester because I won't be there. So if I can get all the PowerPoints done, hopefully by the end of this month, I'll have time to actually make some work. But I'm an oil painter. so I can't breathe in the terp. So I have to revert back to acrylic because that's what I started with. So it's a good challenge for me to go back to that kind of stuff. And also drawing. So drawing is not really toxic. That's something good to learn. But it's always people.
I love your portraits since I saw them the first time in Instagram. I think was the first time. I love, and now that I know your background, it makes total sense. Like, you know, I can get everything together now. From your story, I love it.
Thank you.
The 5x7 ink and watercolors,
Yes.
the 200 that you made, do you have that whole series?
I've sold some, but it's not that many, like maybe 10.
Okay.
Yes, I do have the whole series. They're like in little boxes. Let me go back, sorry. Did I really put all these slides on this thing?
Yes.
Okay, so those, yes. So I have most of them, yes.
What are they painted on?
They're painted on watercolor paper. So I draw them out first. I try to give myself like a 5-minute gesture. I love gestures. You get more of a looser flow. It doesn't feel so tight with the people because I want them to feel a little bit loose so that you can show the body language. So I practice and then I keep the better ones.
What's your stuff?
Kandy Lopez.
Hi, what's your feeling on using digital pens and programs like Procreate to do art?
I've never used them. I think about it all the time. Before I went to USF, I went to MICA, which is Maryland Institute College of Art, which is in Baltimore. I was there for a year. It was $40K when I went there, so I went there for 1 year. And I thought I was going to be an illustrator. So we had the technology to do so, but I never took advantage of it. But I'm like, I need to buy one of those things and one of the little tablets so I can actually draw it out. I'm pro anything that has to deal with art.
All right, anything else?
I'm here.
No, please give her one more round of applause.